presentation recorded. I think we'll get started. He's just going to do a high-level overview of who Aktion is.
Yep. Thanks, Amy. Hi, Mike. Hi, Sandra.
Oh.
Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning. Amy, if you could you pass me permissions to share my screen so I can share my PowerPoint?
And just for those of you that are on, you can ask questions either in the Q&A or the chat, and we will address questions at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, if shared my screen, please let me know if
I
you
can
guys
see
are
it. You should
perfect.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll dive right in. Thanks. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today for our overview of TimberScan and AvidPay. I know you're all Aktion Sage customers, but I'm going to just highlight a few things about Aktion before we hand things over to Mike. Real quick, this slide shows some recent awards that Aktion has received, both for being a value-added reseller or a VAR, and for our managed service and technology offerings. We have 2 company-owned data centers, one in our headquarters, which is located in Maumee, Ohio, right outside Toledo, and the other one down in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we have many of our Sage customers trust us to host their workload and software in a cloud environment. And then as you can see over here, just a company overview. We have about 200 employees and about 6,000 customers. While we sell and support your current Sage accounting platform, I wanted to highlight a couple of items here to be aware of. Sage Intacct Construction is a new cloud-based next-gen cloud solution from Sage. So if you haven't already gotten a chance to see it, make sure you sign up and check out a demo. But also, we partner with great ISV companies that bring you products to enhance and customize your Sage solution, such as TimberScan, which we'll be going through today. Aktion has had a strong partnership with Core Associates, the people who bring you TimberScan, and we're excited to show you that and give you an overview today. So hey, if you guys have any questions, my contact information is right down here. Please feel free to reach out, and we'll make sure that we get any questions you guys have answered. So hey, I hope you guys enjoyed the overview of TimberScan and AvidPay. I'm gonna turn things over to Mike now.
All right, Bill, thank you very much. And Amy, it looks like I'm gonna need to give me permission to share my screen.
Yeah, I'll do that right now. You should be
able to
You
see
should be good to go. I can see your screen.
You see it now?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so let me open up my PowerPoint slide here. Good. All right, so I know that we have a mix of potentially some current TimberScan clients. Some of you are not currently using TimberScan, and perhaps we may have some clients that are using Sage 100 as opposed to Sage 300. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to walk through primarily focused on TimberScan, which is our solution for Sage 300, but I want to emphasize that what I'll do is I'll spend a little bit of time toward the end of the presentation showing you a version of TimberScan, if you will, that is designed for Sage 100. And when you see the application, the concepts of the workflow that we've designed are exactly the same for Sage 300 as they are for Sage 100. And it's all built around what we refer to as purchase to pay. So what we've done is we've designed the application from that perspective, and we've done it for both TimberScan for 300 and TimberScan Titanium for 100. All of those features that we built into TimberScan that you're going to see me demonstrate today are also available in 100. That said, again, what we want to do is we want to focus on the purchase to pay experience. And I'm going to try and walk through this in a scenario where you never have to touch a piece of paper anywhere along the way. So with that said, let's just first of all go through what my definition of what I refer to as a purchase to pay solution. And it's really for you to have one place to retrieve all of your information around an invoice. And you do that by allowing the integration between TimberScan and Sage 300 or TimberScan Titanium and Sage 100. And there are really 7 steps involved in this. Step 1 is, what did we purchase? So what TimberScan will allow you to do is to find out what that purchase order is, match the purchase order information with the invoice, but also what the receiver did we receive? So we're talking about, what did we purchase initially? What did we receive? And then with that, we take that information and we match that against the invoice. Now we're at that point where, what were we billed? From there, we talk about who approved the billing. So we're basically kind of managing that workflow process of invoice comes in, invoice goes out to be approved, and then how is it coded? So in many cases, we're looking for, from an accounting perspective, we are looking for example, a project manager or a property manager to be able to review and code the invoice properly. But once that coding process is done and the approvals are done, the invoice then resides in Sage 300 CRE. Everything is updated, all of your financials. And at that point, you're at the point of processing payments. And what we want to be able to do in TimberScan is manage that payment process. So what's the payment status? And finally, how is it paid? So these are the 7 steps that TimberScan allows you to manage from within the application. We're able to do all of these things from within TimberScan and from within TimberScan Titanium, giving you that complete picture and building around the invoice transaction. So it's managing the invoice against the purchase, it's managing the invoice against how it's being approved and coded, and it's managing the invoice against how it's being paid. So with that in mind, basically what we've designed is a one system, one platform, one data entry point application that creates automated workflow automations from PO to routing and approval of AP invoices. The system was designed several years ago, 2004. It's utilized by over 2,100 companies and over 30,000 users today. And what you're going to be seeing is a system that was designed specifically and exclusively for Sage 300 CRE. We basically created the integration that's really second to none in the industry. So the AP entry screen replicates the Sage accounts payable distribution grid. So when you're entering invoices, it's as if you were keying that invoice into Sage 300 CRE. Everything functions the same way. But we've built a number of other tools around that to make the experience even better. And then we create what are called electronic invoice packets, including all the supporting documents and the image of the check attached or payment, whatever that, however that payment record was made. And it's all attached to the invoice, and it's attached from within Sage 300. It's basically attached, so you can see it in Sage 300 CRE. Okay, a complete purchase to pay solution where we never touch the paper. That's what we're accomplishing here. Acquiring invoices, we'll talk about email monitoring and acquire automation. We'll talk about OCR capture to be able to use and utilize with the invoices in TimberScan. And then we'll talk about mobile approvals, approvals on the go. We'll also talk about document management just in general, integrations to products like Procore, cloud-based field purchasing, timesheets, and expense expense and credit card reconciliation. And then finally, the embedded pay process, automated vendor payments embedded into TimberScan. These are all tools that are available that TimberScan can offer if you so choose. I'm going to finish the PowerPoint part of this with this one last slide. And this slide is basically a workflow depiction. So normally, if I'm meeting with a client one-on-one, one of the first things I'll do is I'll usually ask them, well, what are you doing today with respect to your AP invoices? How are they being managed? When an invoice arrives at your door, what do you do? And I hear, in many cases, kind of the same scenario is taking place. It's done manually. Invoices come in, we put them in a folder, and then, someone has to come in, maybe a project manager has to come in, take the folder. They have to go through, look at the information, the invoice and whatever. They need to be able to hand code information on the invoice. And eventually they get it back to accounting, and accounting goes through and enters the invoice into Sage 300. The workflow that we've designed in TimberScan is all automated, and it starts at the point where the invoice arrives at your door. You go through an acquire step, and we'll talk about how you can get those invoices into the system without having to touch the paper. But once they've been acquired, they go into TimberScan's AP invoice entry queue, and they're being entered into TimberScan. They're not being keyed into Sage 300. The nice part about the AP entry in TimberScan is that you don't have to fully code an invoice. So I could enter an invoice and maybe I know what job it's associated with, but I don't know what cost code. That's fine. You can still go ahead and put in whatever information you have, let the business rules route it off to the approvers, and then the approvers come into TimberScan and they go through their approval process. They can do coding if need be. But once the invoices have been approved and we've gone through what's called this final review step, which is basically usually someone in accounting that wants to take that one last look at the invoices, they get passed automatically to Sage 300 CRE. The only thing left is that they have to be posted in Sage 300. But once they're posted, all of your financials are updated. It's as if they were keyed into Sage 300 CRE, and you have all of your invoice information along with the invoice image itself. Now, the final piece to the puzzle, which you're not seeing here, is what we've added over the past year or so. And it's the embedded pay experience. So that's going to happen in Sage 300 CRE initially. You're going to still go through and you're going to select your invoices to pay like you normally would. But what's going to happen is that TimberScan can then manage that process and then pass that information to the AvidPay network where those invoices can be paid to your vendors. And there are a number of choices that you can make, and we'll talk about those different options as we get into that. But basically what you're able to do is you get out of that, what I feel is kind of really an archaic process of having to print checks, put checks into envelopes and mail them all out. You can just automate that whole process. And I'll show you how seamless and easy it is when we get there. Okay, so let's do this. Let's pop out of the PowerPoint slide and let's go into the application. So I'm going to show you TimberScan in a couple of different versions. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you TimberScan on what I refer to as kind of the desktop application. I've already logged in TimberScan. You see that I have this icon on my desktop. I just selected that icon and it brought me through my security credentials to a screen that looks like this. So the main menu of TimberScan is basically designed where you have your applications across the top. As you select any of these, for example, when I go into the reports menu, see how it brings up the various reports that I can choose here. And then if I select any of these, it will just open up into the lower body of the window. Navigation of TimberScan is very simple, very straightforward. It's a very user-friendly system, very easy to work with. Now, I also wanted to just mention that there is dashboard functionality throughout the application. So I just happened to open up this dashboard when I logged in. You'll notice that what I'm able to do is I can see things in different formats. So for example, if I wanted to be able to see how many outstanding invoices we have by vendor, I can do so. And as I start to hover the mouse around the pie chart, see how it brings up these tooltips, and it will tell me the number of invoices that I have associated with that vendor and the dollar amount. Same thing if I wanted to do this by job. And then if I want to get to more detail, I can actually click on the little tabs here, and it will take me into that particular vendor, for example, and I can see the actual detailed invoice information. Now, these various graphs or panels that you're seeing are interchangeable in some ways. There are certain things, there's a library of different graphs that I can see and I can bring up or add or subtract or whatever. I just happen to pick these 6 that I wanted to look at, but you notice how there are a number of other options available. Okay, so main reason to emphasize the dashboards is just from that perspective of being able to see things from more of a 20,000-foot view. So instead of having to go in and run a number of reports or do some inquiries or whatever, I'm just able to see everything right here in the dashboard view. All right, so let's start at the point where an invoice arrives at your door, regardless of how you receive that invoice initially. To get the invoices into the system, we go to the acquire function, and then I choose the option acquire images, and it opens up this viewer. Now, there are several ways in which you can go about acquiring an invoice into TimberScan. You can drag and drop. So if I had a document that was emailed to me or something that was in a file or a folder, I just want to grab that particular document, I'll just go ahead and pull it in like you see here, open it up into the viewer, and then I can zoom in and zoom out. But you can also just use the wheel of your mouse. Notice how I'm just sizing this, I'm using my mouse right now to just make it as large or small as I need to on the screen. So drag and drop is one option. Another would be if you're receiving invoices in the mail, you would put them onto your scanning device, and you're going to scan them to your TimberScan file. So that all I have to do here is I just open up that TimberScan file, and my invoices will all be scanned, compiled together in one file, and I can just pull them all in at one fell swoop. The third and final option is email. So more and more companies today have a designated AP email address that they've asked their vendors and subs to be able to email invoices to. So what you can do is in TimberScan is we have an email monitoring program, and it will basically monitor that email address, and behind the scenes it takes the attachment, takes it out of the email, drops it into a file for you. So basically what I could do here is I could simply come in, I could open up that email file. All of my emailed invoices are now compiled. They're sitting here, and I can just grab that whole stack of invoices if I need to, and I can just pull them all in at the same time. Takes a second, it just goes out, grabs them from the file, and then they're all here together. Now, see, I can scroll up and down. Notice here I'm looking through the thumbnail view here. Let's say, for example, that I had a scenario where maybe pages 2 and 3 were supposed to be, maybe they're 2 separate invoices, but they came in as one PDF. You can just separate them. You can right click. You can say, I want to insert a break, and you just split like that. Or you can say, mark as new invoice. So either of those options are possible. But basically what you're doing is you're just going through here. You're grabbing those particular invoices that you want to acquire, and then you're assigning them to where they need to go in accounts payable invoice entry. Remember, back to the PowerPoint slide, we're not sending these out to the approvers just yet. They're going to go there in a few minutes, but we're going to start in accounts payable invoice entry. So what you do is you define the data entry group, that accounts payable person, or that group of people that are going to be assigned the invoices. You can have multiple people here, multiple groups, it doesn't matter. You're basically just choosing who you want to assign them to. You hit process. The invoices come out of the viewer. They'll get sent on to this person or group, and they'll pick them up, and they'll start entering the invoices in TimberScan. So step 1, we've taken the invoices, we acquired them. Everything's now electronic, especially if they came in by email. We've never touched a piece of paper yet. So the invoice came in by email, we pulled it out of the file, or we dragged and dropped it from the email, and then we just go ahead and hit process, and we send it on to a AP invoice entry. Let's go to step 2. Whoops, sorry. Didn't want to exit here. Okay. Step 2 is invoice entry, which is where I'm going to go now. I have a whole bunch of invoices piled up. I'm going to have to really get processing here. So I'm just going to go ahead and call them up. For right now, I'm just going to go and randomly enter whatever the first invoice is in this batch. And it's this invoice for power equipment rental. Now, again, the way that the invoice entry screen is designed is I have the image in the upper part of the window, which again, I can size with the wheel of my mouse. I have the data entry grid down here in the lower part of the window. And then I have a series of control buttons across the bottom and the top. I'm going to talk about several of these as we go through this. Now, another thing you'll notice here is that as I start making this image larger and larger on the screen, it starts to get cut off by the data entry grid down at the bottom. But you can move this out of the way. If I wanted to take the data entry grid and just disconnect it, move it to a second screen or something like that, or over to the other side of the screen, you can just shift it around so that I can have the image in full view on one side, and I can have my data entry grid available to me on the other. I'm not going to do that now because I want to be able to display all the information here on this one screen. I'm going to start entering the invoices. As I mentioned in the PowerPoint slide, this AP entry grid is the exact same entry grid that currently exists in Sage 300 CRE. Now, this may not have all the exact same fields in the exact same order as you have, but whatever you have, when you implement TimberScan, you get those same fields lined up in the exact same order here. And it functions the exact same way. So from the perspective of implementing TimberScan, it takes very little time because you're using an AP entry process that you're already familiar with. Because it mimics what happens in Sage, but we've built a number of other things around it, which is what I'm going to show you here in a second. So if I went in here and I don't happen to know my vendor code, I can just go ahead and click on the list here. I bring up my list of vendors, and I'm just going to go through here. If I want to start typing, I go ahead and start putting in power equipment rental. It goes out and searches and finds it. All of your master files, vendor, job, cost code, GL account code, all of that's coming directly from Sage 300 CRE. We built the integration as such that it's as if it's like almost like a 360-degree extension of Sage 300 CRE. Everything is designed with the idea that it's as if we're in Sage 300 already, and we're just exchanging data back and forth. So I'll plug in vendor code here. If you're using the compliance portion of Sage, you'll get these compliance warnings like you see. When I plug in the invoice number, if it's a duplicate invoice, which this one is, it's going to stop me immediately. Again, speaking to that integration, it already knows that we have a duplicate invoice out there somewhere. Now, let's say that I stop for a moment and I'm looking and I say, you know what, I don't recall when we processed invoice 24011 for power equipment rentals previously. I don't have to leave this screen. I don't have to go out and run a bunch of reports, try to figure out when did we process this invoice. I just click on the history button here at the bottom of the screen. It brings up a report that shows me all of the invoices for that particular vendor. Not just the invoices that are in TimberScan, all of the invoices for that vendor. So these could be invoices that we've already fully processed. We've paid them. Other invoices may be somewhere in the routing and approval process. This is designed like an Excel spreadsheet, and you can use it like Excel. So I can sort these columns. You click on the column heading, and it sorts by that column heading. You can group. You can sum up these totals. You can even export this grid to Excel. Now, what I want to do is just find that duplicate invoice. It's right here. I see the original invoice date. I see the accounting date. I see when it was paid, if it was. When I click on the detail button, what I'm seeing is how that invoice was coded, what commitments, what jobs, what cost codes were associated with this invoice. This happened to be a single line entry, but on a multi-line entry, all of those line items would be listed here. The other thing I can do is I can hover the mouse on the commitment, the job, the cost code, or the category, and it brings up a tooltip that provides me with more detail about that particular field. For example, if I hover the mouse on the commitment, I can see the original committed amount, any change orders, what's been paid, what's been invoiced in the balance. If I hover the mouse on the job, I can see the revised contract amount of the job and the job to date billings. On the cost code, you can see what's been invoiced on that cost code and how it compares against the revised estimate. Same thing with the cost category. These tooltips are available everywhere in TimberScan, not just on this one screen. Everywhere you go, you can see these tooltips. Now, in addition to this particular screen, what I could also do is I could call up the invoice image. So over here, I can just view that image and I can see, here's the invoice. Someone put a sticky note on it. Behind it, I have all of my supporting documents, including a purchase order that was attached. And the system also attaches what is called an approval page. This is something that TimberScan creates automatically every time you process an invoice. And it shows you every iteration of the invoice, who did it, and when they did it. So I get all of this detail, and throughout all of this, I never left the invoice entry screen. So I'm back here. I'm just going to go ahead and append the invoice. I want to, push forward here. So we'll go ahead and we'll plug in a dollar amount. I'm going to go down to the distribution grid, and I'm going to talk about the distribution in two ways. One, where I have a commitment, and the second, where I don't have a commitment. With a commitment, I just go out, I find my commitment, I go ahead and pull it up. It brings up the line items. There are only 2 line items for this commitment. I can either selectively go down through and pick which line items I want to invoice against, or you can just click here at the top and it lets you select all of them. And then we just go ahead and compile those. Once we get through the compliance warnings, you notice how it automatically built the line item information from the commitment. It also created this commitment summary on the right-hand side. So I could see what's been committed, what have we currently invoiced, and what is currently in TimberScan. It takes the combination of what's invoiced in TimberScan compared against the commitment to provide you with the balance. And if the balance goes negative, you notice how it highlights it for you in red. Now from here, I can also hover the mouse on any of these fields like we saw before. If I want to get more detail, but let's say I'm finished with the invoice. At this point, I go ahead and accept the invoice. TimberScan routes the invoice off to the approvers based on the business rules that you've set up behind the scene. One of the first things that you do when you implement TimberScan is you create these business rules. And they're meant to reflect how you route invoices today. So if you said, well, we would normally route the invoice to the project manager on this job, for example. If it's that straight directly to the project manager routing, we can actually pull the project manager credentials from Sage 300 and apply it so that there's virtually nothing that you have to do in the business rules. It just automatically assigns it to that particular project manager. But of course, you can have multiple approvers. You can do things like thresholds, invoices greater than a certain dollar amount can be escalated up to another level of approval. All those things can be done. Okay, so that's entering an invoice against commitment. Let's look at one other item here. Let's say I don't happen to have a commitment. What I could do is, maybe I know that this is associated with job 03001. And that's basically all I don't happen to know how it's supposed to be coded. Again, what I mentioned in the PowerPoint slide, I can still go ahead and accept this invoice, route it off to the approvers, and then they can pick it up and they can code the rest of the invoice for me. So you don't have to go through here and wait for the approver to send you the cost codes, send it to them and they can code it. Or if you prefer that your approvers don't actually do coding, you can send it with, as restricted so that they're not able to actually code, but they could let you know with a note, for example, how this is supposed to be coded, and then you can key in the rest of the information. Now, a few other items here, supporting documents. You can attach any type of document. If I had a purchase order, receiving ticket, packing slip, whatever it is, you can just go ahead and you can acquire those like you can any other invoice or any other document. I find this purchase order that I need. I just go ahead and click on the attach button and I can attach it to the invoice. You can drag and drop documents right here to the screen. You could drag and drop an email conversation right to the screen. So let's say I have some correspondence going back and forth by email. and I want to just take the email conversation and I want to attach it as if it were another document, you can go ahead and do that. You can email from TimberScan. So if I said I needed to email, my contact at Power Equipment Rental, because there's a dispute with this invoice, I just go ahead and click on the email button. I don't have to, send this out to a PDF, go to Outlook, create an Outlook email, attach the PDF. I can do it all in one step right from here. A few other things, you've got all your annotation controls here on the left-hand side. If I want to put sticky notes, signatures, any of those types of things on the document. But if you don't want to clutter up an invoice with a bunch of sticky notes, you can click on the comment tab here at the top, and you can add a note this way, and it will then attach to the invoice. And then anytime someone opens up the invoice, that note will pop up in front of it. But this eliminates having to put a bunch of sticky notes and annotations all over a document. Okay, we want to finish with the AP entry part of this because we've got a lot of other things to cover. But two other things I wanted to mention. First of all, you notice how I brought up this invoice and I went through and I basically keyed in all of the information here. TimberScan has an optical character recognition component. It's called TimberScan Capture. And basically how it works is that you go through and you can define where certain information is on an invoice, and you can embed certain information so that I don't have to key this information in. The system will just automatically pull it in for me. So let me back out of here. Let me go back in. Let me skip past this first invoice. I'm going to go to the second invoice, which is for HD Supply. And you notice with this particular invoice, as soon as I open it up, all of these fields have been pre-populated. Now, how it got pre-populated is because I set up what was called a capture template. And on that template, I defined where their invoice number is, where the invoice date is, what the total dollar amount is. I also was able to go through and assign the default vendor code for HD Supply. Maybe there's a certain job specifically that we work with, or maybe there's a commitment or purchase order somewhere on the invoice that I can retrieve. All that information is available to you in the TimberScan Capture, which I'm going to show you in a moment, so that once I highlight that information, it then pulls that information into the screen here. So very quickly, let's go out. Let's look at a capture template. Let's look at the one for HD Supply. These are very simple to go through. You acquire a vendor's invoice. Once you have it, it takes literally no time to go through and set it up. You use the menu here to be able to define and make sure that you've got these fields lined up in the right order. So you notice how the invoice number is highlighted here, the invoice date here, the amount due further down here, highlighted in green. Your description, you can take, if you wanted to have a default description come in, you can. If your vendor happens to put your job number or puts a commitment or purchase order number somewhere on the invoice, you can let the system retrieve that information as well. In addition to info that you can get off of the actual invoice image, there's an option here down here called invoice coding that allows for being able to set up defaults. For example, the default vendor code. I can't get the vendor code from the AP invoice image because HD Supply didn't put their vendor code on here. That's something you set up in Sage 300. But what you can do through invoice coding is you can default in their vendor code, so it will pull it in every single time you retrieve an invoice. Same thing, maybe I've got a job that I know it's, for the foreseeable future, we're going to charge all of our HD Supply materials to job 03001. So I could just have a default in. You can go back and change any of these if you need to. But basically, once the template is set up, then it just becomes a matter of seeing it, acquiring it here, where I go through and once I've acquired the invoice, it reads the template and it populates the invoice entry screen for you automatically. Okay, so very straightforward, very simple. Now, what we've done so far, we've acquired an invoice. If it came in by email, we'd never handled a piece of paper. We got it into the system using the email monitoring program. We acquired it. We send it here to AP invoice entry. If I've set up OCR capture, basically I got the invoice. It came into the system. I opened it up. It's basically pre-coded. I can take this invoice and I can say, go ahead and accept it right from here and send it off to the approvers. Nothing else was needed. I basically didn't even have to key anything in. I just went ahead and accepted it. I'll send it off to the approvers and let them go through and finish up the coding. That's how quick, that's how simple, that's how efficient the system can allow you to become with processing your transactions through here. Okay, let's jump over to the approval side. One other thing before we get there, however, I also wanted to mention that in addition to what I've been able to demonstrate for you so far, there's also a credit card reconciliation and expense tool associated with TimberScan. So very quickly, back out of here. Let's just take 2 minutes and I'll show you basically how this works. So what I can do is we have a mobile tool here that would allow me, it's basically a forms tool that would allow me to go in and let's say that I was out at Home Depot and I made a purchase at Home Depot and I want to take this, I want to open this up on my phone. Okay. So I'm trying to basically simulating that I'm on my phone. You know, it defaults in today's date. It defaults in me as the card holder, for example, will just plug something in here. You know, and maybe I put in some very basic information. I'll just say I got something from Home Depot. Total dollar amount was $350.10 or something like that. If I want to put in some notes, I can. Maybe I took a picture of that receipt and I put it in my gallery and I can just go ahead and I can pull it in here and I just attach that receipt to that particular form. Now I can, if I needed to, I could still come in here, I could code it. I could put in my job and cost code if I needed to. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this entry by hitting submit. What that will do is that will invoke the routing rules. It's similar to if I were an AP entry and I wanted to go through and send off my invoices to the approvers. Let's say I've done that. And now I come back in here. Let's say it's gone through its approval process. It ends up in the credit card reconciliation program. You have the opportunity to download the statement automatically from your credit card company. I can go in, I can open up that statement. The system compares the statement items on the left to the receipts that you've received on the right. You can go through here, and if I needed to actually open up the receipt and do some coding, I can do that. So I can just see the receipt. I can see all the information that I need to here, code it if I need to. But ultimately, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reconcile. And then once I've done my reconciliation, it takes those reconciled items and it drops them here where I can click on the transfer to TimberScan button and it will create an invoice or invoices, depending on which format you want to use. If you want to go with what we call statement style, it will create an invoice for the statement and then attach all of your receipts behind it. If you want to create separate invoices for each statement item, or excuse me, for each receipt, you can do that. That's what we refer to as receipt style. In any event, it can enter and drop an invoice directly into TimberScan, which I'll show you here, an example of one. So here's that credit card statement. So I did the statement style. It dropped my transactions, created this invoice from the statement, has all of my everything already here pre-coded, has all the receipts attached. So I can simply come in here, and if I still needed to route this off to the approver, I can still go ahead and accept, send it off, and let them finish the coding on their end from this perspective. So it's quick, it's easy, it's mobile. And it allows me to go through and, process my transactions or my receipts of, any of my credit card transactions and create invoices for them in TimberScan. Okay, all right, we're gonna get to the approval side real quick. Before I do so, I talked about some of the reports and inquiries earlier, things like the invoice status report, where if I wanted to go out and I wanted to see what the current status is, how many outstanding invoices do we have? What's the total dollar amount? And where do they stand? So if I want to drill down from here, I can then look and see where they're located. If I want to focus in on Doug, he's got 7 invoices, $134,000 that he's sitting on. I can drill further in and I can see when those invoices were assigned to him. I've got all my details here and I can call up the invoice image if I need to. So the reports give you a number of different ways that you can be able to see things. The inquiries do as well, but what I wanted to highlight here is the job cost inquiry. So if you're doing any substantiated billings, time and material or cost plus billings, or maybe for a loan draw or something like that, you need to compile all the AP invoice backup. Maybe it's a job audit. I could come in here, I could say, give me everything for the month of June. We'll go June 1st to June 30th. I'm just going to simulate this here. I got to really say all dates, but let's just pretend it's June 1st to June 30th for job 03001. In a matter of seconds, it goes out, it creates my report for me. I've got all of my transactions here. And then way over on the right-hand side, along with all the detail, I have all my invoice images. Basically, from here, you click on this report button, and I can download those images. I can download anything associated with those images if I want. So the system gives me that ability to be able to not only create this report, but also download so that if I wanted to hand this off to an auditor, or I've got a time and material or cost plus billing where I need to compile the backup, I can do so. And it creates a report. That report looks something like this, where I've got, my report information at the top, followed by my invoice attachments below it. Okay, let's quickly go over to the approval side because I do want to save time for the release of payments, and we're going to talk about that in quite a bit of detail. So you notice how I switched the view here. I'm now looking at what's called TimberScan Go. And I mentioned that TimberScan basically has 2 formats. We have what I refer to more as the desktop version, and then we have the browser version. This is TimberScan Go in the browser. Now, what we've done over the course of the last several months is we've taken basically all of the functionality that you saw me demonstrate on TimberScan Desktop, and we've moved that to TimberScan Go. Now, that's not to say that I can't continue to use regular TimberScan here to be able to process all of my and do all of my functions. I can. But the idea behind TimberScan Go is it's in a browser and it's mobilized. So especially from an approver's perspective, I might want to come in here as an approver and I might want to call up my power equipment rental invoice. And instead of me having to approve the invoice, on my desktop, what I might want to do instead is I might want to open this up on my phone. So now I'm seeing the invoice on my phone with all the supporting documents attached. And then all of my action buttons are embedded into this gray and this green button here at the top and bottom. So if I needed to go in and add a note, put the invoice on hold, reject it, approve it, I can do all of those things regardless of whether I'm on my phone, I'm sitting at my desk, I'm maybe home, I'm on my iPad, whatever it is. So it's a responsive user interface designed in a browser that will allow me to be able to process transactions in essence from anywhere. And I talked about approving, I talked about rejecting, putting on hold. If I need to go in and look at how it's coded, I can. If I wanted to see the tooltips, they're built into these little inquiry buttons here, so I can call up my tooltip and see that information. If I needed to go in and search and find, you know, that maybe this was charged to the wrong job or cost code or whatever. You can do all of those things. If I need to add line items, I can. But basically, I'm going through, I'm either approving, I'm rejecting, I'm putting the invoice on hold. If you put the invoice on hold or reject it, you have to put a reason in as to why you did so. That way, if anyone else needs to know what the status is, they can come in and they can see it. You can route invoices on the fly, in essence, to someone else that's not part of your normal routing if need be. Obviously, I can add notes to this. I could email this off to someone if I needed to. So again, we built TimberScan Go initially as kind of a mobile approval solution, so that someone doesn't have to come into the office, sit at their desk on their desktop, and do their approvals from here. They can do it from anywhere. But we've expanded the use of TimberScan Go to include, as I mentioned before, a lot of the functionality that current TimberScan desktop already has. So in here, you'll notice I can actually come in here. I can acquire invoices. I can do AP invoice entry. I have my final review. I have my inquiries through here. So we've taken a lot of the TimberScan features, put them into TimberScan Go. So if you prefer to work in a browser, then by all means, you can use this and use this particular format instead of, you know, having to do a lot of your processing through regular TimberScan on the desktop. Okay, speaking of the desktop, let's just say that we've gotten approved invoices back. Through final review, we've taken those invoices, we passed them on to Sage 300 CRE. We've updated Sage, and now we're at the point where, you know, we want to maybe go in and process some payments. So let's go do that. Okay, so I'm going to go into Sage. Sorry, I was logged out and forgot to log back into Sage here before we started, but let's hope we can get it going. There we go. Okay. So let's go through the process of, let's say that we selected invoices to pay, and now we choose the option print checks, just like normal. But basically what we've done in TimberScan is we've built an embedded pay control system, which I'm going to demonstrate for you now. So basically what I can do here, instead of actually sending these payments out to a physical printer, we have what's called a print driver, and it's called Print to Avid. What Print to Avid does is it says, okay, instead of us printing these particular payments out to a printer, instead what we're going to do is we're going to compile them, and we're going to send them over to TimberScan. And in TimberScan, what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here to TimberScan Go. I'm going to open up the TimberScan pay control system. And I'm going to go in here. I'm going to look at those payments that we just selected that we would have normally sent out to our printer. And I'm going to go into my approval screen. Sorry, I may have gotten logged out. It may take a second here. Whoop, here we go. Okay, so what the approval screen does is it simulates what would happen if we were making this payment manually, making it by printing a check. It actually creates what looks like a check. It has the Sage check number assigned. It has the check stub at the top, and then it has the invoices that check is paying in the middle. And also, this particular payment only has one invoice associated with it. So you notice how it automatically attaches the invoice, and it attaches all of the supporting documents behind the invoice. So basically, what is this used for? this is for a scenario where you print out checks and then someone has to go through and sign off on the release of those payments. That's what this is designed for. Now, not everyone does that. So I'm going to talk about how you can go around this in a second, but this would be for that scenario. So when someone says, well, we have to print checks because we need someone to be able to go through and take the check, match it to the invoices that check is paying, and then they'll sign off on the payment. It's all done right here. You don't have to print those checks out and do that laborious process of matching it to the invoice and then sticking those checks in envelopes, making copies and do all of that. It's all right here for you electronically. And then if I decide, if I'm the check approver, I just go ahead and approve the payment when I'm ready. If I'm not ready, I put it on hold. Maybe we're waiting for, maybe there's a compliance issue that we want to get resolved. And so, I can put it on hold. So this is for that scenario. Now, when I approve this payment, what it does is it releases this payment to the AvidPay network. AvidXchange, our parent company, is a financial institution. So think of them as just like any other bank. They've worked with vendors all across the country, hundreds of thousands of vendors, and they've made arrangements with those vendors. Many of them, I'm sure, are your vendors. They've made arrangements with them for how they want to be paid. There are basically three options with which the vendor can choose. They can choose a virtual card, they could choose to be paid by ACH, or they can be choose to just still receive a check. And Avid goes ahead and cuts that check on your behalf. Now, you could say, well, you know what? I'm going to lose control here because if I go ahead and release these funds, how do I know when that vendor was paid and how they were paid? We have the pay inquiry. So in the pay inquiry, basically what this does is this allows me to see everything associated with that particular transaction. Let's take asphalt and paving, for example. So what I can see here, I can see the payment method. They were paid by a virtual card. You can see other options here. Whole Foods was paid by a regular check. Here's one down here for Henderson Properties that was paid by ACH. So basically I have the transaction itself. I can see what the status of the transaction is. So I can see it's a cleared payment. I can see when everything took place. Here's that Sage check number that was assigned. Here's the bank that it was drawn from. And then if I needed to, let's say that Asphalt and Paving called up and said, we haven't received payment yet. I can look here, I can say, well, it certainly looks like you were paid by virtual card on 11/2. But if you need to, what I can do is I'll open up the transaction record here and I'll show you the remittance advice. And if you need to even further, I'll just go ahead and I'll send you this proof of payment document. So I've got all this information. Now, this proof of payment document automatically gets attached to the invoice when you process your payments through this method. So if you think about, well, normally what we would want to do is we print out the check, we'd want to take a copy of the check and attach it to the invoice. The system does this for you automatically through here. And then, of course, what I can also do is I can open up the line item information and I can see all of the status that was associated with this transaction here. And I can see everything that took place. Here's my log that shows me everything associated with this. Okay. So we basically have walked through that entire workflow process from purchase to pay. And finally, what I'll do just to kind of finish this off before we open it up for any questions is jump back into Sage for just a moment. And let's go into the inquiries. Let's do invoice register. Go down to power equipment rental. Go to invoice 24011. I click on the paperclip. I'm able to see attached the invoice, all of my supporting documents, all the way down to how that particular vendor was paid. So we take the data, not only do we send the data over, we send over all of the images as well, and they're all attached in Sage. Okay, so hopefully what you've seen is how we can process everything from purchase to pay, manage it all through TimberScan, never have to touch a piece of paper anywhere along the way. And for those of you that are perhaps current TimberScan clients, what I hope you're able to see are some new tools, some things that maybe you're not using or taking advantage of today, particularly this entire pay control process. And if you're using Sage 100, I would encourage you to let's schedule a one-on-one presentation so that you can see the 100 version of this, but just know that everything that I just walked through today and everything that I showed you for Sage 300 works the same way for Sage 100. It's just in a little different format. We built a different tool to be able to process transactions. And I guess with that, Amy, Bill, I think we can probably open up the floor for any questions.
Okay, I have one so far. If I choose to print checks, can I still attach a copy of the check to the invoice?
You can. Yeah, we have a tool that allows you to attach checks from within TimberScan. Yes. Yep.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? Quiet group today. Hopefully, Mike covered everything that you had questions on throughout the presentation. Give it another minute to see if anybody has anything. But if not, we'll wrap it up. We will be sending out the presentation to everyone that was on the call, and anybody that missed the webinar, they will get it as well. So it looks like we can wrap it up for today.
Right. Well, Amy, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for joining today. I know it's a busy time, and I appreciate your time in viewing this today. But thanks again. As I think as Bill mentioned when he started the PowerPoint presentation on Aktion, we have had a long-standing, wonderful relation with Aktion Associates, and we work hand in hand to provide you with solutions like this. So please feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to help.
Yes, and I will be sending follow-up. It takes a few hours for the recording to generate. So if not today, then tomorrow by midday, you'll have the presentation, and anyone can reach out to me if they have questions as well. And I can always forward them over to Mike. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate your taking time out of your day. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.